Hey, what's up, everyone? Okay, so I just posted a new thing about banking on Ego Proctor. Money Changes Everything. It's just screenshots of what's in the book. I don't even have to say anything, except for introduce different topics. And so then this song, Omerta, by Lamb of God comes on, and they're talking about this is what has been wrought for 30 pieces of silver. So you go through what's in that book. And what you start to get is this idea, if you've been through any of Polygoth's videos at all, about there being a goddess resurrection sect called the Essenes that were part of Judaism, that were trying to unite humanity into a single belief system and just make everything fair and clean for everybody, against the bankers who were pushing essentially the Moses story and that kind of stuff. And this gets into how that got kind of, I don't cover anything with the religion, this is just banking in this, but this will lay the groundwork for something later. But you could look at Thomas L. Thompson on the historicity of the patriarchal narratives. That'll get you started. And then the Mythic Past, that came out in like 2000. That'll get you started further. Dr. Richard Carrier's on the historicity of Jesus, and then all the other stuff. It's mentioned in my other posts, so you'll be able to find anything that's there. So what we're looking at is this song points out what's going on with interest, right? So Jesus is sacrificed because Judas accepts 30 pieces of silver and turns him in. Okay, so what I'm looking at instead, let's just get rid of that myth of the narrative. Remember, we're doing Essenes versus bankers, like nature guys versus like industrialists. And if you look what's in that banking stuff, money used to essentially grow on trees. It was grain or it was cows, and you could grow that, and if I lent you grain, you could return it in cows because I can grow cows, right? So it's an even exchange, something that can on its own reproduce itself. And then the Anatolians got silver involved into Babylon. Okay, so picture perhaps this story of the 30 pieces of silver is really that cattle trader goes out, gets it in his mind, because now he's told a story by these Anatolians about how wonderful it would be if he could trade in silver instead of cows, because they would literally trade in cows, drive them around, trade you 30 cows. You would keep those cows alive for about a year, work your field, milk them. There was a whole lot of labor involved, a lot of fucking labor involved in that. Then you have to breed them and then successfully return 33 1/3% interest on that to the guy that owned it. So you're busting your ass, like continually working to get this money. And so this guy with silver says, hey, well, watch this. Here's what we'll do. We'll lend you 300 silver or something, right? And so you come get it from us, and then you take it out and you deliver it to the people, and you lend it out at 30 at a time. And then they can use it to buy goods. Well, and then we'll give you a kickback, right? We'll pay you some extra silver for doing this. And that can be used to buy all these different goods. So all of a sudden, this guy that used to be a cattle farmer realizes that he doesn't have to work anymore. So he comes back into Babylon and just starts introducing silver as the trade currency. And Babylon falls to the fucking silver traders because they don't understand what's happening. And even if they do, they can't get out of it because their laws are going to defend the silver traders. And then the silver traders get into the temples and they just fucking wreak havoc. And you can see that evidence from Goatsman's book about the fall of Babylon and like the wars and all that kind of shit that came out over interest. And then it moves into how democracy started in ancient Athens from banking. So you can read all that. The full chapters are there. I don't need to get into that very much, except that Aristotle was pointing out that you can't breed silver, so there's no point in trading in it. It's not a fair trade, because the person that gives the silver makes a profit off of doing nothing, while the person that ends up accepting the loan becomes a beggar. But in between that, there's also Beggar Thy Neighbor by Charles R. Geist. I'm trying to switch gears. So if I lost you there, it's okay. He did the history of debt, essentially, usury and debt. Usury is just a Latin word for interest. So it's essentially the history of interest. But he only goes back to about Aristotle. He doesn't go back that much further. His book was published in 2013. Goatsman's book was published in 2016. So it makes sense that they wouldn't... But Goatsman had published a paper earlier, I don't know when, and I don't know that would have come up in Geist research. I don't know. I've never talked to these two PhDs of economics, lifelong teachers, and whatever researchers into it. I've just read their books. So Geist points out that Aristotle says, hey, you shouldn't be using interest, and then he goes into when interest came into Judea. So I think I might have included, if not, you can just read the book, Money Changes Everything. And it'll talk about how brothers began charging interest against each other, and interest was being used in all kinds of creative ways to control people. That's what it had become. Feeding on people. There's even a description of the financial district, which is Wall Street. I mean, it comes clear out and just says, here is all the shitty shit from Wall Street happening in Babylon. It just gives you a breakdown of how it all works. Well, Babylon falls, and then the Torah leaves Babylon and goes to Judea. By 444 BCE, Nehemiah is using interest to settle disputes, like legal disputes between people in court. That was what was coming out of Babylon. That was that same kind of shit. It wasn't. I don't know a lot of evidence that it was being adopted in other places. People had kind of figured out pretty quick that interest is fucking evil, right? That's why we get all this usury, bad shit. And then it points out that in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, the Jews are told not to trade at interest to each other. They can lend each other money if they want, but don't charge interest, because it'll make a beggar out of your neighbor, which is the same thing Aristotle's saying. But Aristotle goes on and explains that you don't do it because you can't breed the silver. If you would have had a biological currency, it'd be perfectly fine. But a non-biological currency doesn't make any sense. But they don't talk about that in the Bible, right? It's just it's that magical, mystical wordsmithing shit. Like I pointed out with Paul in that other post I made about his 1 Corinthians 30 or whatever the fuck that was, his love poem, and I just ripped that apart and shit on it. So, whatever. You can take a look at that post. It's like 35 pictures long, about 30 pages of content. About 6 of those are just publishing date and photos of books. And then another 4 or 5 are just logos or introductions to the different sections. So you're looking at like 25 pages maybe of stuff to read out of these books. I just snapped them and kind of blended them together. You'll see how the introduction works. I hope you guys enjoy if you're interested in learning about that kind of stuff. I'm going to go back to whatever I was doing before I decided to share that epiphany that I think that's what that story is really talking about the fucking betrayal of the silver. Nothing to do with the human sacrifice. It's all about the fall of Babylon and how that came about because of probably Anatolian trade. Somebody or a group of somebodies came in and started trading silver into Babylon and fucking broke it. So this is a description of like that ancient kind of warfare. Turned into this weird allegory about fucking being a light in the sky. That's how Jesus started, and it was a Jewish Messiah thing. I don't know. You can get into Paul God, learn about those goddess resurrection things, about how so I've already talked in other places that language has no intrinsic meaning, right? Like the sounds themselves, I mean the symbols themselves make no sound, yet in your mind when you see them you correlate them with the sound. Why? Because you've been trained to. There's things that have talked about that, right? Same thing with the sounds. They're just face farts. Okay, we'll cut it there. So the Torah, when it left Babylon, was something like 65,000 characters of nothing but consonants. There were no spaces in between them, or vowels, or punctuation marks anywhere to denote any kind of structure. And so what you now have is you now have to be able to use a set of what might seem arbitrary rules to get into it and start moving